Hello everyone. Before we start today's video, if you could all do me a solid and lightly tap the like button, perhaps share the video about and leave a comment. If you are not subscribed, subscribe as well. It would greatly help this channel. Thank you very much. Hello everyone, welcome back to a Megon 2 Electric Boogaloo. Today we're going to be discussing transgender rights, and that includes sports. To start, we're going to talk about what was going to happen under Boris Johnson, where the Equalities Minister, at the time Kemi Badenoch, warned that pupils needed to avoid using toilets during school time, because the plan was to halt this growing trend of universal toilets. Plans that were approved quietly last month included changes to planning regulations. What may have helped this was that women's rights groups have been arguing that they are disadvantaged by gender-neutral toilets. Kemi Badenoch's proposals at the time were to prevent non-residential buildings from being built with universal toilets to halt the forced sharing of spaces. The plans, understood to quietly have been approved in June, included changes to regulations to enshrine separate stalls in new buildings and demand that partitions be installed in current unisex facilities. The current Conservative Party is going through a leadership campaign election of their own little sort inside itself, up their own arseholes. With this, many have already started getting flayed for what is a woman, transgender rights, and it is getting quite heated, especially when some ministers get caught out saying something in the past, and understandably it gets used against them now when their opinion has changed, or appears to have changed, cause optics. Penny Mordaunt being the more obvious. The question of what is a woman has been circulating for quite some time, and many people have been reluctant to engage in the question with an answer, as it does lead to inevitable backlash, especially when I think many people are just trying to get rid of the terms man and woman altogether. Wouldn't it just be so much simpler if everyone was just called it? Now this ties into sports, because I noticed on Twitter twice, two different sports were trending, the first being swimming. And the reason why is because the World Swimming Body, FINA, F-I-N-A, have adopted a new gender inclusion policy. This policy only permits swimmers who transitioned before the age of 12 to compete in women's events. The organisation also proposed an open competition category, something which I have mentioned many times would be a more than likely suitable replacement. As far as transitioning before the age of 12 goes, no child should be transitioning before the age of 12. James Pearce, who is the spokesperson for FINA President Hussein Al-Musallam, told the Associated Press, "This is not saying that people are encouraged to transition by the age of 12. It's what the scientists are saying, that if you transition after the start of puberty, you have an unfair advantage, which is unfair. They are not saying everyone should transition by age 11. That is ridiculous. You can't transition by that age in most countries, and hopefully you wouldn't be encouraged to." Basically what they're saying is that it is not feasible for people who have transitioned to compete without having an advantage. Pearce also confirmed there are currently no transgender women competing in elite levels of swimming. The World Professional Association for Transgender Health has lowered its recommendation minimum age for starting gender transition hormone treatment to 14, and some surgeries to 15 or 17. FINA's new 24-page policy also proposed a new open competition category, saying that it also was setting up a new working group that will spend the next 6 months looking at the most effective ways to set up this category. A category I again have been talking about for a while. There would have to be a separate one for this to be truly fair. Some of the more notable names that have celebrated this result would include Caitlyn Jenner, who tweeted out, "It worked. I took a lot of heat, but what's fair is fair. If you go through male puberty, you should not be able to take medals away from females, period." And with over 3,500 replies to that tweet, I can be certain many of those are not in her favour. I wonder why. Now, as an athletics purge of sorts is taking place in the United Kingdom, the triathlon has become the very first British sport to ban all transgender women from competing in female events at elite and grassroots levels. British Triathlon are instead changing their men's category to Open, which all trans athletes can enter, which is another first by a national governing body. This one's a tricky one, and I'm sure many jokes will be made that a number of athletes who are originally biologically male transitioned so they could win something. We will refrain from making those obvious jokes because they are classless. The idea of an open category, though, does make this more interesting. I still stand by the idea of a third category, but then I guess once you set that precedent, there is inevitability there'll be a dozen categories, which would invariably end up with everyone getting a gold medal of some kind. The new policy introduced comes into force in January and will replace the old guidelines set in 2018, which allowed trans women to compete against females if they had suppressed their testosterone, with the British Triathlon chief executive Andy Salmon saying, "We concluded that triathlon is a gender-affected sport, and that means that athletes who are born male have an advantage over athletes who are born female, and this advantage is significant in swim, bike, and run. We also concluded that physiological advantages are retained by testosterone suppression. The new policy will require two categories: a female category, which will be open to athletes who are female sex at birth, and an open category which will be open to all athletes, including men and transgender athletes. For international competition, only athletes who are female sex at birth will be eligible to represent Great Britain, England, Scotland, or Wales in female competition. We believe this is the right policy for our sport in Great Britain. We are incredibly proud and precious about our tradition and our key principle of gender equity, and that is why fairness in our sport is so important. We have taken strong legal advice and believe our policy is legally robust." Andy Salmon also went on to confirm that there are no, at present, elite-level triathletes that are transgender. Many people believe that the arguments over transgender athletes in sport has been escalated by, for example, Britain's Emily Bridges in cycling, America's Leah Thomas in swimming, which are two of the three disciplines that make up the triathlon, both of whom have had opportunity, done well, had them taken away, arguments have ensued, it has gotten quite messy. Now I want to draw attention to the open category as a replacement for men's. Why can't men have their own category? Why can't it be male, female, open? Just a question. Perhaps exclude those that are, let's say, better suited for men's categories, who would then try and be a cheeky and get into the open one. Does it make sense yet? Why do men have to lose out on having their own exclusive category to pander, which is how this can be interpreted? Also, by having this open category, yes, there'll be many people who get to compete, but those same people that will get to compete will undoubtedly get left with a, significant disadvantage over their counterparts in that category. And I don't mean gender counterparts, I mean the peers who are in the same category that is labelled open. Also, with it being an open category, you are going to have to recognise the men that win. What about those that win that are not men, that are transgender? Say one does win. Do they then not get the opportunity to represent their country on the world stage? What if other countries have different rules? This is where this does get a little bit muddy, because you are hedging your bets on something, and that is that someone who is transgender might not be as good as a man. Just thought I'd put it out there as a possibility of potential issue in the future, because it is possible.